So I have a question for you. What's one TV ending that made you just sit there for a minute? Not because it didn't make sense or whatever, but because you honestly couldn't decide how you really felt about it. Like maybe you loved it, maybe you hated it, a little bit in between, or maybe the first thing you did was grab your phone because you was like, I gotta see how other people feel if they feel the same way I feel. That's what's got me thinking about From. We're still one more season in before we find out how this story actually ends, but I started wondering, what are some of the endings that would have completely changed the way you looked at this show? Now, before anybody starts typing, no, this isn't a prediction video. I'm not saying any of these are going to happen. This is just one of those what if conversations. Some of these are a little out there, and some of them honestly aren't that hard to imagine. And every one of them would have left people very unsatisfied with a lot to say. Wait. Real quick. If you enjoy videos like this, do me a quick favor. Hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps this channel continue to grow, and every new person who joins just makes these conversations a lot better. All right, let's go. What if everyone was dead the entire time? Let's start with the one that almost every mystery show gets compared to at some point. Everything finally comes together. Boyd figures it out. The monsters stop coming out at night. For the first time, the town is completely quiet. Then the boy in white appears. He looks at everyone and simply says, "You never made it past the tree." One by one, memories start coming back. The Matthews family remembers the crash. The bus passengers remember theirs. Everyone remembers the moment their life ended. The reveal? Fromville wasn't a town at all. It was there when they ended their life and they died. Every choice they made, every person they met, every loss they experienced was a part of their journey before moving on. The town fades away. Everyone disappears. The end. Now, would that be emotional? Absolutely. But after spending years trying to solve symbols, monsters, bottle trees, and everything else, I think a lot of people will walk away feeling like all these mysteries suddenly didn't matter anymore. Now, what if Tabitha was in an asylum the whole time? This one might actually be the darkest ending on the list. Imagine everything we've watched: the monsters, the bottle trees, the lighthouse, the music box. None of it was ever real. The final episode ends and we cut to a psychiatric hospital. A nurse walks quietly down a hallway, stops at a door, steps inside. Sitting on the floor is Tabitha. The walls of her room are covered with drawings, the symbols, the fallen tree, the lighthouse, the monsters, everything we spent 5 seasons trying to figure out. Then we learn the truth. Thomas didn't die in a tragic accident. Tabitha accidentally caused his death. The guilt shattered her reality. To survive it, her mind created Fromville. Then comes the biggest twist. Every person we've come to know was somehow from her real life. Boyd wasn't the sheriff. He was her psychiatrist, the one consistently trying to help her find her way back to reality. Donna was the head nurse who looked after her every day. Christy was one of the doctors on the team. Jade was another patient who spent his days drawing strange symbols and talking about things nobody else could see. Victor was a long-term patient who barely spoke but filled notebooks with drawings. Even Jim and Julie were real, visiting her whenever they could, hoping one day she recognized them again. Every familiar face in Fromville has always been right there in the hospital. Her mind simply gave them different roles. The monsters? They weren't creatures lurking outside at all. They were her guilt, the fear she'd never escape what happened to Thomas. I'll be honest, that would have been heartbreaking, but after spending years of trying to solve this mystery, I think a lot of people would be very disappointed if the answer was simply that it all existed in one person's mind. What if Ethan wrote the story? This one might actually frustrate me the most, and I've heard this one before, but what if the town is gone? Everyone makes it home, life goes back to normal, then the screen fades back to black. 30 years later, we see an older Ethan as a guest on a podcast talking about his career as the best-selling horror author. The host brings up Ethan's most famous novel, From. Ethan explains that when he was a kid, he was obsessed with the Chromonocle. It sparked his imagination and inspired him to write stories. As he got older, those stories became darker, more complex, and eventually turned into the novel From. Was Fromville just the evolution of Ethan's favorite childhood story? I'll be honest, I think that ending would keep people talking for years, not because it answers anything, but because it doesn't. It gives you just enough to question everything you've watched without ever confirming whether Fromville was a real place or simply the greatest story Ethan ever told. What if It was all Jade's simulation. This one would have been one of the biggest twists in the entire series. After spending 5 seasons trying to figure out what Fromville really is, we finally get our answer. The finale ends and the screen suddenly glitches, everything freezes, the monsters stop moving, the trees disappear, the town begins to break apart like corrupted computer code. He's sitting in a high-tech lab wearing a virtual reality headset. It was a simulation he created. Originally, it was meant to study fear, decision making, and how people behave when they're pushed to their limits. But somehow along the way, the simulation became something even he couldn't control. They became real, self-aware, trapped. It would explain why Jade always seems more connected to the mysteries than everyone else. But on the other hand, I think a lot of people would walk away feeling like the supernatural mystery suddenly turned into science fiction. What if Ethan was in a coma the whole time? This would have been one of the most emotional and probably one of the most controversial endings the show could have done. The reveal would be that Ethan never woke up after the RV crash in the very first episode. Everything we've watched since then, Fromville, the monsters, the boy in white, the talismans, Boyd, Victor, Jade, it was all happening inside Ethan's mind while he was in a coma. It would also explain why his mind created a place like Fromville in the first place. Right before the crash, Julie was telling Ethan the story of the Chromonocle. She tells him that Norman died and Ethan refuses to believe it. That's one of the last conversations he had before the accident. What if Ethan's consciousness took that story and expanded it into an entire world? His mind created a place where impossible things happen, where monsters exist, where heroes go on quests, and where there's always another mystery to solve. Finding out everything came from Ethan's imagination while he's in a coma would make a lot of fans feel like the mystery they invested in was never real. So those are my 5 alternative endings I think would definitely get people riled up and talking. None of these are predictions. This is just a fun what if conversation about how differently From could end. Now I want to hear from you. Which one could you actually see happening? Which one would you absolutely hate? And here's the real question I'm really curious about. What ending do you actually want? What would be the most satisfying conclusion to Fromville and all of its mysteries? What would make you walk away thinking, yep, that nailed it? Let me know down in the comments because I genuinely love reading your theories. And who knows, one of you might end up calling the ending before season 5 even gets here. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And as always, every great story deserves a real good talk. I'll see you next time.